Good evening, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. Charis Books is the school store partner for Agnes College, and Agnes College is a co-sponsor and special co-sponsor of this event tonight. We are really delighted to be here with Tina Pippin in conversation with Jan Willis. I'm going to introduce Tina first, since Tina is the person who sort of helped bring this together and is going to be our interviewer tonight. Tina is the Wallace M. Alston Professor of Bible and Religion at Agnes Scott College in Decatur, Georgia. Again, our school store partner. She was a member of the Bible and Culture Collective, the Postmodern Bible at Yale, the author of the Apocalyptic Bodies, The Biblical End of the World in Text and Image from Routledge, and the co-editor with Cheryl Kirk Dugan of Mother Goose, Mother Jones, Mommy Dearest, Biblical Mothers and Their Children, along with other publications on apocalyptic and the Bible in film studies. Tina is the first recipient of the American Academy of Religion's Excellence in Teaching Award. She is an activist, educator, and also co-hosts a radical pedagogy podcast with Lucia Helsether, Nothing Never Happens, at nothingneverhappens.org, which I'll be putting in the chat for folks who want to check that out. And the person of the hour tonight is Jan Willis. Jan holds a BA and MA in philosophy from Cornell University and a doctorate in Buddhist studies from Columbia University. Jan is currently a professor of religion and Maratha at Wesleyan University in Middleton, Connecticut, and most recently was a visiting professor of religion at Agnes Scott College. She has studied with Tibetan Buddhists in India, Nepal, Switzerland, and the US for 5 decades and has taught courses in Buddhism for over 45 years. She is the author of The Diamond Light, An Introduction to Tibetan Buddhist Meditation. She is the author of On Knowing Reality, the author of Enlightened Beings, Life Stories from the Ganden Oral Tradition, and the editor of Feminine Ground, Essays on Women and Tibet. Additionally, Willis has published numerous articles and essays on various topics in Buddhism, Buddhist meditation, hagiography, women in Buddhism and race. In 2001, her memoir, Dreaming Me, An African-American Woman's Spiritual Journey, was published. It was reissued in 2008 by Wisdom Publications as Dreaming Me, Black, Baptist, and Buddhist, One Woman's Spiritual Journey, and Charis had the honor of celebrating that book with Jan at that time. In December of 2000, Time magazine named Willis one of the 6 spiritual innovators for our new millennium. In 2003, she was a recipient of Wesleyan's Binswanger Prize for Excellence in Teaching for Excellence in Teaching. Newsweek magazine's Spirituality in America issue in 2005 included a profile of Willis, and in May 2007, Ebony magazine named Willis one of its Power 150. In April of 2020, her latest book, Dharma Matters, Women, Race, and Tantra, Collected Essays, was published. And that's the book that we are so excited to be here to celebrate tonight. We're not sure we were going to celebrate it in person, and we kept waiting for the time when we could all gather. And finally, we just gave up the ghost and struggled through the technology. And we are all so delighted to be here, and very grateful to y'all for making this digital space, and grateful to all of our friends and fam across the world watching with us tonight. So I'm going to unmute and get out of the way, and just thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ER, and thanks to Charis Circle and Charis Books for hosting this event. We love celebrating books, and this is a book of 30 years of writing, of essays. And I'm going to hold up the book again. Dharma Matters, Women, Race, and Tantra. And Jan, I'm going to ask you to, first of all, take us into the title of the book and how it came to be. And everyone who gets this book, you'll notice it's a who's who in Buddhist studies and practices who have endorsed this book. Two forwards, one by Charles Johnson and the other by Janet Gatsko. So if Jan, tell us how you came to gather your life's work of these essays into Dharma Matters?
Okay. Is it hard if I first begin with gratitude?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the word that comes to mind when I think of this particular book. And I trust you can hear me okay. Well, the word is gratitude. First, gratitude to you, one of my best friends and dearest colleagues, for agreeing to do this. The book came out in April of 2020, so we've been waiting to do this for a long time now. But you never gave up hope, nor did ER, nor did Charis, so I'm really grateful for that. I want to thank you. I also have to thank Daniel Aitken at Wisdom, because he welcomed the book. He said he'd be delighted to publish it. And that was surprising and amazing. And they did such a good job of it. Mm-hmm. So I really want to thank Daniel. I, of course, have great gratitude for the two people who wrote the forewords. Charles Johnson, my longtime friend and wonderful writer, and Janet Gatso, professor at Harvard, because I had two great forwards written for the book. I appreciate it. And lastly, my gratitude to Wisdom's marketing team for coming up with me this list of endorsers. Because at the end, they asked me for names, and I gave them a whole slew of names, and then they added names to those names. And I have the printout that I received on December 11th, 2019, listing 31 endorsers that they'd asked. They'd made requests, and 26 of those folks wrote back. So as I've said to you before, it was almost like being at one funeral and hearing positive things said about one. You had no idea. So I heard all these great descriptions of my contributions to the field. So that was just overwhelmingly a great thing. And I have gratitude for all those who endorsed it. Now, to answer your question, how the book came about. In 2015, I was asked by Buddhist Christian Studies, that wing of AAR, to write a review, or rather lengthy review, of Rita Gross's book. Her book called A Garland of Feminist Reflection, 40 Years of Religious Exploration. Now, the book had come out years before. There were a couple of reviews. Buddhist Christian Studies asked me to do a lengthy review of that book in 2015, and I did. And I'm not sure that Rita Gross ever saw it. It was a glowing review because she died suddenly in November of 2015. So the first thing was I was working on Rita Gross's 40 years of looking back and her collection of essays, and then her sudden death. Then in 2017, Stephen Batchelor, another friend of mine, came out with a collection called Secular Buddhism, his thoughts on that. And I just thought, well, I'm going to die too, since that's the end of life. And I mentioned it to Daniel Aitken at Wisdom. And that's when, to my surprise, he said, Wisdom will be delighted to help you bring these pieces together in one place. That was really the most gratifying thing. So this book contains 18 pieces, the earliest piece going back to 1983. And in one place, I mean, this is not all the things I've written, but it gives a good idea of the kinds of things I write about over 35 years of thinking about those things. So 18 pieces, 4 categories: women, Buddhism and women, Buddhism and race, Tantric Buddhism and saints' lives, the Ganden oral tradition that ER mentioned, and Christian Buddhist reflections. And that's what Dharma Matters is, that collection.
Well,
Now,
one thing that I want those listening and watching to know is that sometimes people can be a little afraid to jump into the Buddhist studies pool, but this is a very accessible book. And each of the categories, and I want us to take the categories one by one, and because we have a good length of time here, and so that they can get a feel for what's in the book, because there's some really important categories here of feminism, and also what Dharma is, and that Dharma has no color, but in your own spiritual journey as a Baptist Buddhist. So, and on the cover, the green Tara. So let's jump in, if that's okay, to talk about women in Buddhism, because you taught a course like that at Agnes Scott more than once, a very popular course. And so, the origins of women in Buddhism, and how they're imaged in the literature, and how the image has changed over history, and your own current connections to women in Buddhism.
okay. I don't know if you're going to show those slides, but women in, I mean, the first one is Green Tara, and Green Tara is on the cover of the book. Green Tara, who represents in Tibetan Tantric Buddhism both wisdom and capability, ability to accomplish a goal.
Mm-hmm.
This is my study, and behind my head hangs Green Tara. I put that in my study specifically because she grants wisdom and she grants ability to do things. And I sometimes have doubts about that. And so when people look at the various iconography that Tibetan Buddhism contains, I say to some students, you should think of it like a medicine cabinet. The enlightened mind is said to have all these qualities. One quality is capability. Green Tara represents that. Insight represents that. So it's like, if you need to work on this, and I've had students over the years say, my memory is lagging, and I'll say, well, work on Manjushri, it helps with memory issues. Say this mantra, D, 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 D. It helps. So students have worked that out. Now, the 4 categories. What I would like to say is, I am in a female body, Black, American, convert Buddhist, former Baptist or raised Baptist. So culturally, I'm Baptist, spiritually, I'm Baptist and Buddhist. Okay. So the women's, the earliest women's, so the pieces are in these 4 categories, but within each category, they are arranged chronologically. So that's important to me. And the first piece I have here is a piece a talk I gave at a conference on imaging, as Professor Pippin has said, as Tina said, on the various images of the female and of the feminine in Buddhism. And what I provide in the first chapter, Nuns and Benefactresses, is sort of an overview of the literature, Buddhist Orthodox literature. What kinds of images were there of women? And in order to show that the images are at first sort of negative, you can't deny it, even misogynist, but that they improve over time. Now, there's a reason for that. And I explain in my courses on women in Buddhism that the Buddha originally founded a male organization, to propagate his Dharma. So these are, you have to imagine, men in the 6th century BC India, when Buddhism was founded, who were leaving wives, who were leaving friends, who were leaving mothers, who were leaving children, and had to suddenly pretend as though the world didn't contain them, because every day they had to beg for food. So the images were really negative, I think, to try to wean those men of their former connections with women. But over time, that got to be more positive. And one finds it's at the same time that Buddhist ideals of giving, Buddhist ideas of making stupas, ways of having more and more people join the fold, and that more and more included women. We find the images get more positive. We also find that historically in India at the time, more and more women are gaining their independence from their husbands, so that they are, I hear an echo, I hope you don't, so that they are more independent. And we find women's images becoming more positive in the literature as those very women become donors and sustainers of the Buddhist religion. So I try to talk about social and historical things through as well as the text. So the nuns and benefactresses argument is that if we look at these images of women throughout Buddhist history, throughout their orthodox texts, we see the images becoming more positive. And I try to suggest why that might be the case. That's the first chapter.
Yeah. Yeah, because you start with the Buddha's aunt.
That's right. Who is the first nun? She becomes the first nun, right?
Yeah.
And I also, and especially when I'm doing the course, and I just gave a course for a New York Dharma Center on women, and people couldn't believe it because I talk about this one text that presents such a negative image of women. It says that it assumes that the Buddha was asked by his aunt to allow her to become a nun, and he apparently said no to her 3 times. So especially modern Western women, what was that? You know, the Buddha saying no. Well, I try to remind people, we don't know what the Buddha said. We don't know. We have no written scriptures of that time. Buddha scriptures are written hundreds of years, not 70 years, hundreds of years after the Buddha lived. So we don't know what he did, but we do know they're Buddhist nuns. So why did that come about? And when we look at that text, and if we unpack it, we can see how intentionally negative that text was created. As a way, Nancy Arafat suggests, she's a Buddhist scholar from old, she suggests it was an economic reason, that if nuns were allowed, the donations that were normally given to the monks might be split. Some suggestion by Gregory Chopin and others that the nuns might have been receiving more donations than the monks. So this text was created at a time, 9th century, when nuns may have been competitively, a threat to the monks. So, and also there are images within that text for a little lit crit stuff that says some of these passages were taken whole hog, whole cloth from some Jaina text. The founder of Jainism, Mahavir, his first nun was his aunt. So there was a lot of fabricating of this early text. But that early text, the Kulavagga still has negative images. Some Western modern day women say the Buddha hesitated. He didn't eagerly accept nuns. And I want to critique that wholeheartedly.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one of the things that a thread that runs through this is you as a Western scholar practitioner, as you name yourself, teaching Tibetan Buddhism in an undergraduate setting, as you did at Wesleyan and Agnes Scott, and now, of course, teaching at Dharma centers all over the world. So as you teach about Buddhism and women, and I would like each category to have like a teaching moment. Then, what have you found in terms of getting undergraduates to connect with these texts?
Thank you. Thanks for the question. A week or two ago, I talked to a grad student at the University of Toronto, and he said, in your teaching, there's one chapter here that's specifically on teaching, but I try to do it in every class. He said, you give this exercise, it's a writing exercise, that ask your students to imagine themselves. I do it whether I'm teaching 3 generals in the Lord's Army and I'm talking about the Middle Passage, or I'm talking about early Buddhism and how it might have been received by women. So I want students to stand in another's feet, right? Stand in another's shoes, right? I want them to develop empathy. I want them to think of themselves in another person's conditions. So I have these writing exercises for the Buddhism class. I do this 3-pronged exercise. I have writing exercise, 2 to 3 pages tops. Create, imagine a narrative. You are a woman or a girl in 6th century BC India. Paint, flesh yourself out. Give yourself a name. Are you a child? How are your parents? What caste are you? What do you see, smell, taste? All of that. All right. Then, so fill yourself out as a 6th century BC girl or woman. Second part of the exercise. Imagine that a nun, you may have never seen one. You may see them all the time at the market. You have to say, imagine that a Buddhist nun shows up one day and is preaching the Buddha's doctrine. What does that nun say? Now, some people write, I had never seen anything like her. It was a woman, but she was shaven head, all that. So that person has to give in succinct form what it is that the Buddha teaches. So that student has to do that, in a paragraph or 2. What is the pith teaching of the Buddha? And then that nun invites you to go with her and join the order. Would you do it? Would you not? And then why? And the why has to be clearly connected with the first things that you imagine as you filled out her contours. So it's that in the 2 to 3 pages, they have to deal with all 3 of those parts of the prompt. And I find I get some of the greatest narratives. Students are so creative. They can't wait to get out of the classroom to go write their stories down. So I enjoy that exercise. I do it as often as I can. And it's about trying to put yourself in another's shoes and imagine how it might be. Not just think about it, but, really emote about it, flesh it out, all of that.
Yeah.
And because I think storytelling is so important to teaching. And creating narratives is so important.
Yeah. And also the lenses, plural, that you use, to read through the lives of women, the stories of women, to read through race, which is our next category. I'm segueing here, Jan. Why is race an important lens? And because, Buddhism has come to the West, with our issues here in the States, then, how you've already mentioned the Middle Passage, and you taught a course that was over-enrolled, Race and Racism Through a Buddhist Lens, that was cross-listed with Africana Studies at Agnes Scott. And in that course, you did things like what you mentioned earlier, the Middle Passage. You connected with Angela Davis, with whom you've had conversation, not in the too far past at Spirit Rock, a bit pre-pandemic, I think. And also, with other scholars, like, your title, Dharma Matters, reminds me of Cornel West's 1994 book, Race Matters. And so James Baldwin and all these films, and you do use media, you use history,
Yes,
and you make it current. So the connection with this ancient tradition or traditions, Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, and then you connect with your own race and the lens of race and current racism, prisons, police brutality,
and marching with King.
Yeah,
I'm from the Jim Crow South.
you're
I
from
mean,
Birmingham.
I'm back in the South, but I'm from a mining camp outside of Birmingham. So that's part of who I am. I'm a person who marched as a 10th grader with Dr. King during the civil rights campaign. And I remind, we're in the midst of Black History Month, right? And as you remind me, James Baldwin, you remember in his letter to his nephew in Fire Next Time, the last line says, James, you and I both know we're celebrating 100 years of freedom, 100 years too soon, because we still don't have it. And I remind our viewers that Amir Locke's funeral was just this afternoon. And so Black people in this country are still being brutalized by our police forces. And that the beginning of this pandemic started with all of us who could safely, who didn't absolutely have to go out and work. We were inside in May of 2020 when George Floyd was murdered in front of our eyes. So I'm for nonviolence. I have to stop with it. One has to say that. But I'm also for freedom, which we haven't yet attained. Now, so I could start by saying storytelling to make a link clearest. Having marched with King, I learned nonviolence. I studied. Ain't gonna study war no more. I learned nonviolence. Peaceful resistance, but resistance nonetheless. And protests for a cause, you know. We marched, and the next year there was the Civil Rights Bill. The next year there was the Voting Rights Bill, right? And now we're still trying to get voting rights. It's how long? You know, my Lord, how long? So, and I also come from the Baptist Church, where in my day, at least, those folk were left-leaning, and or not to say progressive, but they knew about resistance. Black Baptists did. And so that's part of who I am too. And what I wanted to say about marching with King and learning those things is that I found those values, nonviolence, peaceful protest, changing things in recognition of our interdependence and our interrelatedness. I found those values when I met Buddhism. So it seemed sort of a natural fit. It made sense to me. And the reason Buddhism, this may be way off your question now, but it seems to me that Buddhism answered what I needed to know as a young Black person in the Jim Crow South. And that was, how do you love your neighbor? If your neighbor is wearing a Klan outfit, how do you love them? Now, I couldn't find a method for how you do that when I was young in the Baptist Church. But I found methods in Buddhism for developing compassion, for developing patience, for developing peace. So I found the methodology that I needed in Buddhism for those Baptist principles and values.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to remind our listeners, there is at the bottom of your screen an ask a question button. If you want to put any questions there, I'll be checking and we can get to your questions. We've got some images that at the end I'll show that relate to a lot of what Jan is talking about here. So it's interesting that when you talk about women in Buddhism or Buddhism and race, you're talking about your last category, which is activist Buddhism, because this is all, activist, and a lot of people may think, well, Buddhism is, silent meditation and asceticism, and, not active resistance for a real political social change. So, you've already mentioned the Baptist Buddhist connection, and how that gives you fuel for the journey, spiritual and political.
In this day and age, we've seen the emergence of what's called engaged Buddhism, which is using Buddhist principles to change social situations, to bring change. The most, you have a picture of this, but the most important, the two figures that are most important in the last few decades are Thich Nhat Hanh, who just passed away this January. He was a Vietnamese Zen priest, and he was in Hue, Vietnam, where he was a monk when the Vietnam War was going on. And Thich Nhat Hanh decided that to be a Buddhist, to be compassionate towards being, it was necessary to get up off the cushion, to get up off the meditation cushion and act. And so he's credited with having coined the phrase engaged Buddhism. And he became friends because Thich Nhat Hanh has written, I guess 70 books have been translated into English language that he's written in poetry. And some of the most famous books are titled Being Peace. Peace is every step. And the example is that if you can develop peace within yourself so much that will spread. But this is how he put it into action. During the Vietnam War, he founded a group of young men and women, Youth for Social Service, he called it. And those youth, and he made it clear they would take 14 vows. He was quite innovative, not 100, not 326, 14 vows. And he asked that his followers commit to taking one day off when they would just devote it to meditation and to their own well-being, which is important for Westerners in particular to hear. Self-care is necessary so that you can rejuvenate, so that you can go on with the struggle. And he managed with those young people to be so well known for his peace activism that folk would stop fighting so that he and those young people could go and gather bodies or people and take them to hospital. They would stop. They would give him, you got a couple hours. He would go in and get people and take them to hospital because they respected the peace that he represented. He did not take sides. It always reminds me, and talk about the connections, of Stacey Abrams saying, don't worry about taking sides. Take stock of what's needed and do that. Do what's needed. Don't take sides, take stock. I think that's what Thich Nhat Hanh was doing now. He's one of the representatives. The other is the Dalai Lama, the Tibetan Dalai Lama. Here he is. The Chinese invade his country. They're driven out as refugees. He's never said a negative word about the Chinese. Never. He's all about peace, making zones of peace. Let's make Tibet a zone of peace. There'll be no more war there. That's one, his idea is that we have to now look out for the earth. And so here are two people who have reasons. They've been in the middle of wars, but they've become exemplars because of peace. And their peace, nonviolent resistance. Engaged Buddhism is all about nonviolence. So that we see some Buddhists in Myanmar and the Rohingyas, those are not. Those are Buddhists who are racist Buddhists. And there's no trace of nonviolence in them. And engaged Buddhism is always nonviolent.
Yeah.
So because they're Buddhists doesn't mean they're peaceful. But engaged Buddhists are peaceful, like Thich Nhat Hanh, like the Dalai Lama.
Yeah, and the category you talk about in the book of compassion. And the other C word, community, and King connected to that, beloved community.
Right, and Thich Nhat Hanh and Martin Luther King, through court, developed a correspondence, developed a friendship. They only met twice. But on one of the occasions where they meet, and you have the picture of that,
Yeah.
King was on his way to give the Beyond Vietnam speech, that famous speech in which he alone, peace activist in the States, he alone of the civil rights folk came out against the war.
Mm-hmm.
And many of his closest friends said, Martin, you're going too far with this. Martin, you're going too far. You're diluting our movement. To which King said, standing there next to Thich Nhat Hanh, if you don't know why I care about people over there in Vietnam, then you've misunderstood my whole movement. You've misunderstood what I'm about.
Yeah.
Because he's talking about globally, people are connected.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm unhealthy or if I'm not well, you can't be well. You know, all of us must be well together. In the beloved community, we bring all of who we are. We bring all of our talents. We don't have prisons. There is no need for them. Right? So they both knew about the beloved community and that organization, reconciliation.
Yeah, and I know one of the things you taught in the Race and Racism Through a Buddhist Lens course was about Brian Stevenson's Equal Justice Initiative project, which
Absolutely.
seems to embody a lot of these principles.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Brian Stevenson, any Buddhist would say, there's the Bodhisattva. That's someone who's filled with compassion, who's made the center of their lives love, like the Good Samaritan. Made the center of their lives love. That's what it's about too. That's what Buddhism is about, I think, at its heart. Some Baptists are about at their heart.
Yeah. Well, you spent most of your years predominantly teaching undergraduates, and you're moving into more, Dharma-centered teaching globally. How is that different? And what is transformative for you in those conversations and engagements with students about these issues?
Well, I think that I have to answer two. There's two prongs to this. I found myself being, I went to a conference once and I wondered on the third day why I was so happy. I wasn't typically this happy at an AAR meeting. And when I looked around, I realized there were only one or two other academics there. We were talking about life values. We were talking about Buddhist practice. And when I looked around, I felt happy that all these folks considered me a Dharma teacher, not a Buddhist study scholar, a Dharma teacher. And I thought, oh, that feels great. Oh, but I've always thought that Dharma centers specialize in practice. And they don't often have the academic side. They don't have the history of Buddhism. They don't know the literature of Buddhism. They know it's quite narrow, the amount of information they have about, so that some Dharma centers now, and this is in the end of her life, Rita Gross was markedly happier than she'd been in years. And that was because one of the centers that she started connecting with, Kendra Rinpoche, named Rita Gross a Lopun. She named her a scholar whose special mission it was to teach her Dharma students. Rita was thrilled. She didn't have to put up with the machismo. She didn't have to put up with the academic meetings. She could bring her knowledge to this center. I feel that's a good thing. Because in an academic setting, I feel I'm not a guru. I'm not there are things I can teach students, but what I would like students to discover at some point is their own inner capability, compassion. I want them to know that they have something. Now, you told me this is about pedagogy. I think one of the things we as teachers want, of course, we want our students to gain information, but we also want them to turn out to be good human beings. So to recognize responsibility towards others, to have some compassion, that kind of thing. We want that. We can't make it so. In Buddhism, it's as if the Buddha could have made everybody enlightened. He would have, but he couldn't. But we do want to. All right. So the pedagogy that I'm learning about is, this is related to Black History Month. It's it's Carter G. Woodson's fugitive pedagogy. I'm sure you thought I wasn't going to follow up. I did. I loved it.
Yeah.
Jarvis Givings.
Yeah.
Talking to Carter G. Woodson founded first the Journal of Negro History. He founded first with some other folks the Week of Negro History, which expanded into Negro History Month, folks. And one of the things that Jarvis Givens points out is, and I saw this all along the way with my own education, Black women teachers were doing this. They were practicing what's called fugitive pedagogy. And Givens means that it used to be the case during slavery that Blacks were denied the opportunity to learn to read and write. That was no. That was against the law, right?
Yeah.
Because that empowered them, gives them freedom, right? What our teachers did throughout my elementary school in the Jim Crow style was lift us up, raise our self-esteem. So we did not only English literature, we learned Black literature. We learned Black poetry. We sang the national anthem and the Negro national anthem. And those, I think, I see that now. Looking back, this was all fugitive pedagogy. They kept our spirits intact. They lifted our self-esteem. Without them, I don't know where I'd be. You know, we were in these raggedy schools, segregated. Didn't know public meant you got your books free. You know, like all they had to stand in lines 2 blocks long to buy used secondhand books falling apart. But so my sister and I would be able to have something to read at home. You know, we didn't have anything that we would do in a public, education system. None of it. And I started school in 1954. I'm sorry, I preach it. In 1954, 11 years later, schools in my area were too segregated. Because the Alabama Supreme Court went to work to block integration. So it's fugitive pedagogy to give someone confidence. And that's what Lama Yeshe did for me. All right. After college, going into grad school, I met someone who gave me confidence. His name was Lama Tupten Yeshe. And you have a picture of him too.
Yeah. I was going to get to him next and that importance. But first, side by side with the school, the fugitive pedagogy in schools was the fugitive pedagogy for voting rights happening with the citizenship schools. So you mentioned Stacey Abrams. The fight is still before us in, different morphed form. And so these principles you're still practicing, but the resistance and the fight is still there. And what keeps your hope in this struggle?
Well, you have to do things, otherwise your hope will definitely wane. And I think, here's love again, that the secret is what powers your struggle is because you want things to be better, because people deserve, right? So, yeah, I'm thinking, the struggle still continues. It's not like I'm thinking Carol Anderson.
Yeah.
That for every step forward, the national and federal government pushes back. which we've seen. We had a Voting Rights Act of 1965. Why are we having these these discussions now? Because in 2013, the Supreme Court gutted out most of the Voting Rights Act. So it's like Angela Davis saying, freedom is a constant struggle.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody just gives it to you. You have to demand it. You have to keep fighting for it. It's important, however, not to hate while you're fighting for it. Mm-hmm. That, I think, is what separates someone like King, like the Dalai Lama, like Thich Nhat Hanh, like the Good Samaritan. Mm-hmm. Don't hate, I was taught, and King says in some of his sermons, I didn't know this discussion would be so wide-ranging. I'm thinking, am I all over the place? I'm thinking that King says, it's a good thing that Jesus didn't say we had to like our neighbors.
Yeah.
But if we call ourselves a child of God, we have to love them. Mm-hmm. And he also goes into that kind of love is developed. It's practice. This is what I mean. The Buddhism and King come together. It's developed over time. There are methods.
Yeah.
It's not just something you say, okay, I'm going to love my neighbor. Mm-mm-mm. It takes practice. It takes development. And I find that the Buddhists have a whole lot of meditations that can help you actually develop. And these are reason things as well. It's not just sitting under a tree, and going blank. These are actual methods that help you slowly develop the ability to truly love another person, even if that person is coming at you filled with hate.
Yeah.
I find that valuable.
Well, I'm going to try to segue into the last section of your book, which is actually the third one, because I skipped to go to the Buddhist Christian comparative reflections and the Buddhist activist issues. It's Tantric Buddhism and Buddhist saints' lives. And one piece in particular, and we had a senior religious studies major last year write a thesis on it, on the dakinis. And that how these images are so complex and speak so much about insight. And so if you could talk about feminine wisdom in this image of dakinis.
Well, thank you. I have said to you that of all these chapters, when I look back on this, let's see, I don't know when I published this piece. I think in 1987, and then came out again 1989. The Dakini piece, I think, is one of my best. That is, I think it's still true. What I'm saying is that this is a really rich symbol within Tantric Buddhism, representing the moment that insight to a new way of seeing, to a selfless way of seeing. This is like stripped down to nothingness. The Dakini is often represented completely naked, a necklace of skulls. I didn't send you this one. I have it around the corner. She's red in color. She's completely naked. Because it's the immediacy of insight. Yeah. It's when you get it. And so she appears in all these different forms. There's a dog barking. You were falling asleep. And, as the light bulb goes off. It's that moment of insight. Instantaneous. So often the Dakini is depicted as being very wrathful, and so Westerners see these women, why do they have women with fangs, It's because that insight scares some people. If she's coming for you, you're scared. But she's always positive, really, because she's just wisdom incarnate. And so in this chapter, I talk about I tell a lot of tales in which the Dakini appears. trying to suggest that, there are many ways we come to meet her. And she might appear as wrathful, she might appear naked, she might appear as a beggar, she might appear as an animal, but her appearance is something that we need to complete our insight.
Mm.
The document.
Yeah.
I like her. You gotta like her. You have to have her. According to Tantric Buddhism, you have to have her. She's wisdom. Yeah.
Are there any other saints' lives you want to lift up as particularly meaningful for you?
Well, I'm looking at our time here, and I'm thinking.
Yes, I am too.
Yeah. I'll just say that the earliest piece of this book was the first in the Tantric Lives. And it's a problematic one, the life of Kyungru Tulku. Kyungru Tulku, in the chapter, I'm problematizing how much this man in the flesh told me about himself. I was talking to him. I was taking his oral history on a Euro tape recorder, and he gave me all these stock formulaic things that had happened in his life to show that he was indeed a tulku, But these are stories that are often repeated. They're told about every saint. And then he started telling me about his torture at the hands of the Chinese. This departs from being formulaic, right? And he said I couldn't use any of the material that he told me about unless I really talked about all those tortures. And so I just raised the problem. What do you do when you have the kind of stuff you expect from a namtar, a saint's life, and this new kind of material? What in the world do we do with that? And I didn't answer it. I just said that in this day and age, we are liable to need it. So we have to think about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in closing, is there any story from the book you especially want to tell us that we haven't discussed already?
Well, I'll just tell you that for me, meeting Lama Yeshe, meeting Lama Yeshe settled for me both my academic and my spiritual life to that point. One day he came to me. He passed me by. He passed by me. He was on his way to brush his teeth. He passed by me. I was standing against a wall outside of Kathmandu, up in the mountains. And I was just standing there. We're going to talk to him later that day. And he just looked over at me, glanced over casually. And he said, "Yes, dear." He said, he said, 2 things in conflict, pride and humility in conflict is very difficult, dear. And he went on to brush his teeth. And I thought, oh my goodness, he's got me. He has got me. He got me. He's so deep into my, because when I came, I'm coming from America. I'm coming from all the negativity and the low self-esteem and all of that. And wanting only one thing, sort of to be able to stand upright, dignified, and feeling worthy. And on his way to brush his teeth, he looked over and he made that comment. And I thought, I better stick with him. I think he sees me. Pride and humility. Very difficult, dear. But it was like, we can work on that.
Yeah.
It was wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, made him very important to me.
Well, to circle back to the first thing you talked about, which is gratitude. And I want to extend my gratitude to you for this book and for your teaching and your life's work, and gratitude to Charis also.
Yes. I'm just going to show you this. photo.
Mm-hmm.
I described it. This is the 67 news conference just before. You see Thich Nhat Hanh there with Martin Luther King.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the news conference before King goes next to the Riverside Church next door to give his Beyond Vietnam speech. And if you haven't read that speech, I highly recommend it. It's very lengthy, but at the end, he talks about the values that the American society values, the three evils, he calls them, of racism, militarism, and consumerism, which match up with the three evils or the three enemies of Buddhism that are ignorance. Militarism would go with hatred, and consumerism that would go with greed. Those three King recognized needed to be completely transformed in America, and therefore he was assassinated exactly 1 year to the date of giving that anti-Vietnam speech. Now, also here's a picture of Lama Yeshe, and I'm sorry there's a glare, but if you see that smiling face, that's how I saw him. Lama Yeshe was my teacher for 15 years. He died in 1984. So I've been a long time without him, but I've never felt as though I was without him. And one last story about him is that when he passed away, about 6 or 7 months after he passed away, His Holiness the Dalai Lama was in the U.S. and he was giving a talk at Middlebury College, and I was there teaching winter term. So I made an appointment, and I had about 45 minutes, maybe 50 minutes with His Holiness. And he's such a generous soul. I mean, I met him in 1970, so I knew him for a long time. But he's such a generous soul. He began by saying to me, Lama Yeshe was my very best friend. And I thought, oh no, you have 7 billion friends. But he said, no, Lama Yeshe was one of my very best friends. So, of course, that was just his generosity to a student of Lama Yeshe. And then I said, well, feeling that I had him there, I'd confess. So I said, well, Your Holiness, Lama Yeshe was leading me in this retreat, and I didn't finish it. I got sick and I couldn't finish it. And he said, no problem. He said, you come to Dharamsala. I'll help you finish that retreat. And I thought, oh, that's so generous. And then I said, last confession, I said, well, I don't practice so much like I used to. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama said, oh, I've been talking to many people here, many of the Tibetans in the Tibet Society. And he says, and I understand you're a very good teacher. He said, so I think teaching is your practice. His Holiness said to me, you know what, I was glad I was sitting down, because otherwise I would have just fallen right down.
Well, these stories are so fabulous, Jan. Thank you so much. And there are many more stories in Dharma Matters. So thank you, Jan Willis.
Thank you, Tina.
For your
Thank you so much.
And thank you, ER.
Thank you, ER. Thank you, Charis.
Thank you.
Appreciate it so much.